Why is the Languedoc a hotbed of experimentation? And what does that mean for the wines you drink? What role have white and rosé wines played in the transformation of the Languedoc wine scene? And what prompted the shift from mass-produced bulk table wines to higher quality, terroir-driven wines in the Languedoc? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Rosemary George. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but if you missed it, go back and take a listen after you finish this one. Rosemary is a master of wine and author of the book, The Wines of the Languedoc. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover how the Languedoc's appellations came to be and why they were relatively late to the game, how the monastic houses contributed to winemaking in the Languedoc region, the historical significance of the Canal du Midi, which food and wine pairings from the area you should try, how the introduction of clay amphorae and concrete eggs have influenced Languedoc winemaking, what changes Rosemary expects to see in the region over the next 5 to 10 years, how you can make the most of your visit to the Languedoc, which wine Rosemary would pair with her favorite childhood food, baked beans. I'm a fan too. And why Rosemary would love to share a bottle of wine with author Jane Austen. Oh, yes, please, as long as, who was it? The Colin Firth who played what was his name? Mr. Darcy. I should know that. Mr. Darcy. Oh, my goodness. Him coming out of that dripping pond with his white shirt. Anyway, welcome to episode 325. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Do you have a bottle of wine that you've been holding on to for special occasion? Dorothy Gator and John Brecher, the former wine columnists for the Wall Street Journal, also Pulitzer Prize-winning writers and husband and wife team, launched this annual celebration on February 27th called Open That Bottle Night, #OTBN. I interviewed them about their fun initiative on episode 116 of the podcast, but since February 27th is right around the corner, I thought I would just bring this up in case you might like to try it yourself. So they encouraged readers to open a special bottle in their cellar that they had been saving for a special occasion. So they flipped this thinking on its head. Make it a special occasion by opening that bottle you've been clinging to. I know I have several. Too many great wines have languished in cellars past their prime drinking window because their owners waited too long to open them. That is a wine crime. So, Open That Bottle Night was created in the spirit of Carpe Diem, or Carpe That Bottle, because no one is promised tomorrow. Since 1999, the couple has helped brighten dreary February every year for wine lovers around the world with their invented wine holiday. What sparked the idea? They kept getting reader letters asking, I have this bottle of wine. When should I open it? Gotta say, I get those all the time as well, along with the question, how much is it worth? I want to sell these wines. Anyway, the result is not only does it bring back great memories, but it also makes new ones as we share a bottle with friends and family. The wines don't have to be old, rare, or expensive, though they can be. And they don't need to come from a large cellar or a cellar at all. It could be a bottle you've been keeping in that closet for, quote, someday. So, do you want to organize your own OTBN? On the last Saturday night in February, you and a friend or several friends can get together in person or online to open those bottles. Couples can crack open a bottle that brings back memories of a first date or apartment. Friends and families might open a bottle that evokes memories of a special trip together. I plan to participate with a lovely rosé that brings back memories of summer because I need that very much right now. Meanwhile, I'm always opening and reviewing new wines on Instagram at Natalie McLean Wine. That's at Natalie McLean Wine. So come over, connect with me there. Back to today's guest. 2 of you will win copies of Rosemary's beautiful book, The Wines of the Languedoc. All you have to do is email me and let me know that you'd like to win. I'll choose 2 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. In other bookish news, if you're reading the paperback or ebook or listening to the audiobook of my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation and Drinking Too Much, a national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of the year, thank you, Amazon, I'd love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'd be happy to send you beautifully designed, personally signed book plates for the copies you buy or give as gifts. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemclean.com/325. The paperback usually arrives within a day or 2 of ordering. The ebook and audiobook are instantly available. Okay, on with the show. In your research, what surprising or little-known historical facts about winemaking in the Languedoc did you discover?
I think the history is quite interesting from the point of view, what happened in 1907 when they're protesting about what they thought was fraud, but the main problem actually was overproduction. And that actually did make people start thinking about the early controls, which then paved the way to appellation contrôlée.
The rules, yeah, the AOC.
Yes, which the first ones in the Languedoc were 1936. 38.
Oh, okay. Much later than elsewhere.
That was for fortified wines, Muscat, Muscat de Frontignan, Muscat de Mirval. The first table wines didn't happen until 1948, which were Fitou and Claret du Languedoc.
Oh, really? They didn't have dry table wines till 1948?
They stood alone until 1982 when Faugère and Saint-Chinian got their appellation. Côte du Languedoc came in 1985 with what they called terroir, which were some of the sort of particular islands of quality, like Clap, and there was Saint-Dréziry, Saint-Christol, some of which were in Montpérou, Saint-Saturnin. And then so those villages are now trying to establish their own appellations. All still in a state of flux. Somebody said Burgundy been doing it for 400 years. We're relatively newcomers to the appellation game. And then, of course, you've got all the EGP, the geographical indications, which the big one is Pays d'Oc, which, of course, those are the ones that really allow for experimentation in the area.
And does IGP cover all of Languedoc or beyond that?
The big Languedoc one is Pays d'Oc, which covers everything. It goes into Roussillon. And then you've got individual areas, some of which are administrative and some are a sort of a geographical feature.
So they have far fewer rules than
Yes, they have fewer rules.
The AOCs.
And higher yields.
Okay. And that's a big contributor to why you say Languedoc is a hotbed of experimentation?
I think so, yes, because the people who don't want to conform to the rules so they can try different grape variety. Then you've also got what's called Vin de France. So if you really don't want to conform to the rules, you just produce Vin de France. And when it's the reputation of your name sells your wine. And I tend to think, if you come across Vin de France in the Languedoc from a grower with a certain reputation, it's going to be interesting. You may not like it, but there will be a reason why it's not conforming for whatever reason.
It reminds me of like what Sassicaia did in Italy. It ignored all the rules until they finally gave them their own DOC because the wine was so great.
Yes.
Yeah. And before we keep going with experimentation, on the history bit, how did the monastic houses contribute to winemaking in the Languedoc?
The monasteries needed wine. Mm-hmm. So vineyards were planted around the monasteries. I don't think they necessarily had a big part in anything experimental or new.
They were so fundamental in Burgundy.
Exactly. I mean, Chablis, the monastery of Pontigny, is actually, key to its development.
Right. Okay. And the history of Canal du Midi, what is that about?
Well, that's all to do with communications.
Okay.
But if before the Canal du Midi, if you shipped wine out of Sète, you wanted to go to Northern Europe, it's got to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. But once you've got the Canal du Midi was built, it linked up with the river systems that took you to Bordeaux.
Okay, so it was a man-made canal that shipped the wines.
It's an extraordinary feat of engineering. Outside Béziers, there's a flight of 7 locks and another 2 that then attach another river to it. If you're driving into Toulouse, you actually drive under it on the motorway. You sort of look up and there's this large thing. You think, well, that's Canal du Midi. Because it's quite shallow, because it's designed for barges. So it's not as though it's deep, but it's...
But still, to have a barge going over your head as you're driving under it.
Well, it's actually unnerving.
Holy, well, be a little
Or
unnerving.
just water over your head, I suppose.
Yeah. And how do you think the Languedoc's culinary traditions have influenced wine styles and wine pairings?
I don't really think of the Languedoc as being great on culinary traditions. It doesn't have that sort of reputation like Lyon or Burgundy. I mean, it's very much, I think, fresh food. So obviously fish, seafood, oysters, because you've got the étangs, the in-water lagoons where oysters are cultivated. Obviously, lots of olive oil features. I think it's fresh vegetables. I think and seasonal stuff. So there are areas that melons, asparagus, that sort of thing.
Do you have any favorite pairings?
Well, I think good Languedoc moment is if you like oysters. There's a little village of Bouzy, which is on the étang de Thau, so you can sit eating oysters, looking out at the oyster beds where your oysters probably came from yesterday. So that's quite nice. Wash it down with some Picpoul de Pinot, which is the vineyard around the étang de Thau. That's a good moment.
That sounds like a beautiful moment. Now, you highlight the importance of white and rosé wines in the Languedoc's transformation. So we always think of the Languedoc as big, full-bodied reds. We don't think of it for whites and rosés. What's happening with those?
Well, you're right. It produces a lot more rosé than Provence. At least twice as much. It might be more.
Is that just because it's such a large region?
It's because it's a large area, yes. Whereas Provence is actually quite small in comparison. I mean, it follows the Provence trend of, very pale roses on the whole. And I think there's some good ones. And the one or two estates that do actually specialise in make the rosé quite special.
Sure. And what about the white wines of Languedoc?
They originally weren't important. The early appellations were red. So like Saint-Chinian, Faugère, both now have a white aspect of their appellation, which wasn't created or recognised till 2004. And you've got the Terrasse du Larzac, which is one of the cooler areas of the Languedoc. That's really, they say, enormous potential for white wine, which they are recognising, but they have yet to actually create the appellation for it. But it's in the pipeline. It will happen.
Right. And yet, climate change, everything's warming up. How do they keep those white wines fresh?
To me, actually, with Roussillon, it's actually to be more of a conundrum because I think Roussillon is really quite hot. And yet they produce some wonderful white wines. I love minerality, those sort of focused, sort of good acidity with Chablis. And you can find wines like that in Roussillon. And you think, how do they manage it? I think altitude could probably play a bit. So the Terrasse du Larzac, there's quite cooling winds and good winemaking. The white grape varieties, I think again we talked about red Carignan, but there's Carignan Blanc and Carignan Gris.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, I mean Carignan Gris is hardly recognised by the authorities. I know a friend was trying to sort of, you've got to do your yield declarations for your harvest, and she's trying to sort of declare her Carignan Gris, and the woman said, "Don't you mean Blanc?" And Katie thought, this is probably not worth an argument. I just, yes, sorry, I just made a mistake. Terre is another one that's rather disappeared. Bourboulin, which is very good in La Clappe. It responds to the marine environment of La Clappe, which is sort of almost surrounded by sea.
Okay. And Carignan Gris, is that supposed to be like Pinot Gris or is it a rosé?
Pink. It's slightly pink.
Slightly pink. Okay.
So you've got Carignan Blanc and Carignan Gris with a little bit of colour. I think the Terre can be Gris. It's some of these old grape varieties, they're being reassessed and looked at. And
sure. Everything does over time. And what prompted the shift from mass-produced table wines, low-cost, cheap to higher quality appellation wines?
Probably the falling consumption of wine in France. You think what France used to drink a phenomenal amount per capita. And then probably wine growers perhaps coming out of the cooperative, they want to do something more individual. There's a recognition that they actually had some really good vineyard land, how good the terroir was. I think it's a kind of reassessment that, they just producing sort of red plonk really wasn't the way forward. Let's see what we actually can do. It's sort of the pioneers of quality. Looking like, go back to Georges Bertrand, let's try aging my wine in a barrel. And he wasn't alone to do that. A sort of snowball. And then I suppose there are a lot of newcomers attracted to the area because land prices are not that expensive. And you can buy vineyards, which you can't do in, say, Chablis or Bordeaux you can, but buying a vineyard in Chablis is pretty tricky.
Right. And I think if people are drinking less but better, winemakers are going to follow suit. I mean, you talk about the interplay between tradition and innovation in the book. What's the significance of amphorae, those clay jugs, and other ancient techniques?
I think that's one of the new things. Yeah, it's one of the new things people are trying because I think they're aware of how wine is made in other parts of the world. And, there's more interest in Georgia now, which, of course, is where they used amphora, quavery, traditionally.
Right, the country, not the state. Yeah.
Yes, the country, not the state. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Right. And so was the amphorae, were they part of the Languedoc tradition, or this is just a new?
This is a new thing. And eggs are another one that people are looking at as sort of interesting. Concrete eggs, yeah.
What do those things do? Like the clay amphorae, how does that change the style of the wine?
It's a neutral way of aging your wine. Some of them are buried, so that's going to be, good for sort of temperature control in the cellar. It's underground, it's not going to get hot. Eggs, I'm told that you don't have to lees stir because of the shape of the egg, there is a very gentle movement of the wine. So.
Oh, okay. So the lees are doing their own thing inside there. The lees, for those who may not know, are the spent yeast cells, dead yeast cells, and they add a creamy texture to the wine. So, and what about the emergence of, well, we talked about this with Gérard Bertrand, but what's happening with organic and biodynamic winemaking in Languedoc? Is it a really big trend now across the board?
I think it's quite important, yeah.
How do you envision the Languedoc's wine scene evolving over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
That's an interesting question. I think the vineyard areas will decline. There's a certain element of overproduction. The problems, if you like, of the Languedoc is there are people who make lovely wine, but they have no idea how to market it. There are a lot of people, sort of say to me, oh, the British market is so difficult. And then you look at, say, an importer. He wants to import, say, Terrasse du Larzac. But, there is a limit to the number of interesting producers from the Terrasse du Larzac you can have. So there are quite a lot of people doing similar things. And is there a market for all these people? And, I can think of people who are very good at marketing. Their wine is sound, but it may not be great, but they know how to market it. Whereas the small guy who's making some really exciting wine, but he just doesn't know how to market it, so he's kind of rather stuck.
Right.
And I suppose also somebody else said, there are two strands to the Languedoc of the individual wine producers. You've got the people who perhaps have come to it and it's a serious profession. They've got a lot of vineyards and they've got a lot of quantity of wine to sell. Then you've got the people who have come in, perhaps a second career, perhaps just a small niche vineyard. They don't have so much wine to sell. I'm not going to say it's a hobby, but it's a completely different scale. And then the good cooperatives still have their role. In the village like Montpellier, where I've got the talking, he said, there are 50 families in the village who I employ, or who are giving grape to me. So the village economy, can depend on a good cooperative that knows how to sell its wine and run a good operation.
And what do you think is the biggest threat to the success of Languedoc wines going forward?
Well, I think what their competition is. They're competing with other countries. I suppose probably threat is competition, possibly, or climate change. Natural phenomena that
if they can't keep up with that, or water becomes a serious issue.
I think Roussillon more than Languedoc is suffering seriously from lack of water.
Sure. Are you optimistic about the future of Languedoc wines?
Yes, I am. Yes, I would like to be optimistic. Yes,
yeah.
I think there's lots going on there.
I know it's hard to generalize about everyone, but do you find it a region of resilience?
I think so, yes. I think probably actually the climate and we talked about the Garrigue, but it's quite wild countryside. I think that if you live in a little village up in the hills, that's going to give you a certain resilience.
Sure. Just battling against the crazy winds and the scrubby land and trying to make a living from it. Yeah. And if someone were to visit the Languedoc region for the first time, what advice would you give them?
Because I was wondering where to start on that one. It's really what sort of wine do you want to taste? I think one vital advice, actually, if you want to go to see a wine grower, make an appointment. Don't just turn up. Then you'll get a much better welcome.
So they don't have open tasting rooms the way they do in North America?
They do, but they might be doing other things. They might not be open. And don't turn up at lunchtime, which is 12 till 2 in France. I know one friend was given rather short shrift by a good friend who's normally very welcoming, but she did turn up at 2 minutes to 12 unannounced.
Right.
That is not appreciated. Then I think you think, what would you like to explore? Where have you been? There are, perhaps base yourself. Pézenas is a lovely small town. It's got nice historical and it's quite central to visiting various other appellations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there particular estates you'd recommend visiting?
Oh, I could recommend lots of friends. I suppose it also depends, do you speak French or not?
Is that critical? Or is there...
Well, I think there are quite a lot of people who don't, yes, who probably their command of English is possibly not great, or they're much more comfortable speaking French than English. So you'll get more information from if you can speak French. But don't be put off, there are people who speak English. And I suppose my problem is because I tend to speak French, I'm not actually quite sure who speaks good English.
And is the Languedoc warm year-round? I mean, is it a nice winter vacation for those of us who live in northern climes, like in, I don't know, February?
Yes. I was there Christmas last year. Christmas Day was a brilliant blue sunny day and it was warm enough to have a picnic on the beach. I put my toes in the Mediterranean.
Nice. Oh, okay.
But then, a couple of days later, it was rather grey. And then the day after that, it was sort of sunny again. So it's a bit hit and miss is what I say. Yes, it can be, but it's a bit hit and miss. Things are probably quieter in the winter. It's really sort of much more buzzy in the summer. Then if you don't like sort of summer crowds, I suppose probably spring and autumn may be more reliable times to visit.
Yeah. Okay. And what are the key messages that you hope that people take away from your book?
Oh, try the wines. I want to encourage people to drink the wines of the Languedoc. If you're unfamiliar with them, please explore them. See what your local wine merchant has. I mean, I suppose is there a lot of Languedoc wine available in Canada?
There's a fair amount. Gerard Bertrand is very big here, but there's Les Gemelles. There's a number of different producers here. Yeah, it's well represented for sure.
Oh, that's good. Yes. So, yes, I would say explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you discovered anything new that you would add to a new edition of the book?
There are obviously new wine growers, but also people move on. So there are quite a few people in my book who are no longer making wine, which is extremely irritating of them to sort of change. It's out of date almost immediately it's published. I think I'd be looking at who's sort of new, how things have changed. But I think now it's evolving gently rather than dramatically.
Right. Okay. Just a few quick questions to round up. Maybe tell us about a favorite childhood food and what you would pair it with today as an adult.
Well, my first reaction to that one was baked beans, which I now can't remember the last time I ate baked beans out of a tin. So
I like beans. What would you pair it with?
I think you'd actually probably go with a lovely bottle of quite simple Languedoc wine. I mean, I would think de Mélioli Taillefer's Les Collines, which is her entry-level wine.
Okay.
And that would go well. I think
baked beans would be red or a white?
It's red. Red. Yes, okay. I'd have red one, I think, with baked beans. Or I suppose roast chicken. Then you'd have something a bit more serious.
Comfort food. What would you pair with that?
Well, again, sort of, yes, a good Languedoc. I suppose when I look at a Languedoc wine list, I tend to look and see who, of my friends, whose wine am I going to drink this evening rather than specifically a Saint-Chinian or a Fougère.
Sure. Okay. And if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside of the wine world, living or dead, who would that be?
I always quite like to meet Jane Austen because I do rather like her books.
The author,
really Pride and Prejudice at school and falling in love instantly with Mr. Darcy.
Oh yes, Mr. Darcy. I love Colin Firth in the movie.
Colin Firth,
Yes, exactly. What would you ask Jane Austen?
What would I ask her? Yes, I hadn't really thought as far as that. Well, I suppose how you go about writing your novel, your novels. What are your inspirations? And then, of course, what wine would you like to drink?
Yes. And what if she bounced that question back to you? Which wine would you suggest you open together?
What would I choose? Depends what we were eating.
Okay. Maybe we're eating something from one of her books. I don't know.
Languedoc wine would go well with sort of something from...
Maybe a roast pheasant or something.
Exactly. Like some roast. Yes, definitely pheasant, I think. Pheasant and long. I've certainly, when I've cooked pheasant, I've served Languedoc wines with pheasant.
Yeah, that sounds great. Rosemary, this is terrific. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything you wanted to mention before we conclude here?
I think we've covered the ground pretty well. Thank you, Natalie.
Well, thank you, Rosemary. How can we best find you online and your books?
My books are now published via the Académie du Vin.
Yes.
And online I write a blog, which is rosemary-george-mw.com.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes so that
Right,
people
thank
can
you.
find you and your books. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting, and we'll have to get together in person next time for a glass of wine.
I hope so. That would be fun
Yeah, it
when you
would
come to
be.
London.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you, Rosemary. Cheers. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Rosemary. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, why is the Languedoc a hotbed of experimentation, and what does that mean for the wines you drink? As Rosemary explains, the Languedoc has far fewer rules and higher yields than any other appellations or regions in France. People who don't want to conform to the rules can try different grape varieties and techniques. They also have the broad designation of Vin de France that allows for just about anything you want to do. So it's the reputation of your name that sells the wine. She believes that Vin de France in Languedoc from a grove with a certain reputation is going to be interesting. You might not like it, but there will be a reason why it's not conforming to any rules for whatever reason. So that could be very interesting. Number 2, what role have white and rosé wines played in the transformation of the Languedoc wine scene? The Languedoc produces twice as much rosé as Provence, Rosemary observes. It's a large area, whereas Provence is actually quite small in comparison and tends to produce very pale rosés, which, by the way, is not a measure of how good they are. White wines originally weren't important in the Languedoc, and the early appellations were all red. But regions like Saint-Chinian and Fougères now produce white wines in designated areas that weren't recognized until 2004. The Terrasse de Larzac is one of the cooler areas of the Languedoc with enormous potential for white wine, but they have yet to create an appellation for it. But that's in the pipeline, she says. And number 3, what prompted the shift from mass-produced bulk table wines to higher quality appellation terroir-driven wines in the Languedoc? Rosemary believes that it was probably the falling consumption of wine in France that prompted higher quality wines in this region. When France used to drink a phenomenal amount of wine per capita, wine was produced in bulk by cooperatives. But now growers are leaving these cooperatives and want to do something more individual. They recognized they had some really good vineyard land. Some of the pioneers of quality included Gerard Bertrand, who started aging wine in barrels, and then that sort of snowballed. Newcomers are also attracted to the area because land prices are not that expensive, so you can buy vineyards. You just can't do that in Chablis, Bordeaux, etc. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation with Rosemary, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online now, no matter where you live. If you missed episode 41, go back and take a listen. I chat with Food Network TV star Kevin Broch about his travels to various wine-producing regions. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
There's a lack of bravery around wine for people that don't know about wine. Just remember in the room, it was like, what does it taste like? And people are afraid to say cotton candy.
Right.
But we know that that's one of the culinary descriptors, or candy in and of itself. Earth, wet leaves, we know all of these things. People are afraid to say them for the first time.
Yeah.
And yet, once you do, you're so empowered. The wine tastes to you like the wine tastes to you. I can read the label. I can read what Robert Parker thinks of this wine.
Mm-hmm.
I can read what Billy Munnelly, who I adore and love, thinks of this wine.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I'm only left with me. It's daunting. Nobody says that with beer. Like, guys don't drink beer and go, I get a little bit of the hops from the seashore by Seattle and the nose of dog hair.
You won't want to miss next week when we chat with Fiona Morrison, a master of wine and author who lives in Bordeaux, with her husband, Jacques Thiampont, of Le Pen fame. This is a cult wine, goes for like more than $1,000 a bottle, but she still has lots to share with us, even if it's not a bottle of wine. She'll join us from her home in Pomerol. And yes, we will be giving away 2 copies of her beautiful new book, the 10 great wine families of Europe with some fascinating stories that we'll discuss. So if you want to get the jump on winning a copy of this book, email me now at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. If you liked this episode or learned even one thing from it, please email or tell one friend about the podcast this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about the wines from the Languedoc. It's easy to find my podcast. Just tell them to search for Natalie MacLean Wine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemaclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or if you'd like to win one of 2 copies of Rosemary's book, or if you've read my book or are listening to it. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Were you surprised about the Languedoc wines? Have you tried them? Do you have a favorite? Email me, natalie@nataliemaclean.com. In the show notes, you'll find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called The 5 Food and Wine Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemaclean.com/class. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/325. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a crisp, fresh white wine from, Chablis? No. Bordeaux? No. The Languedoc. Cheers. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.